This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
We didn't give any room for competitors to have advantages over us that would be sustainable. Our competitors had customer service where, you get like a auto response, someone will get back to you in 24 hours. Whereas FastSpring, we were responding, 11 o'clock on Saturday night, Christmas Day, all throughout the day. And I didn't have to ask anybody to work those hours. It's just, they cared.
The center is the customer. They're the ones who are paying for everything.
I just saw this as, oh my God, this is like my chance.
$250,000, it was almost surreal.
You can't just cut out one person in the supply chain in order to solve the problem.
Those are the kind of people you want. You respect them, their integrity, their intelligence, their ability, their can-do attitude, hard work.
All right, welcome to the Spring 2015 Distinguished Speaker Series here at UC Santa Barbara. I'm very, very proud to announce our sponsor, Bynec, Favre, Archibald, and Spray. I'd like to give them a hand. Very appreciative for their financial support. It's great recognition for this program, which is being watched by millions of people across the globe. And it's wonderful to get a little bit of financial support to bring in speakers even beyond California. So we're very, very happy to have them on board. I am John Greathouse. You can follow me on Twitter at John Greathouse. Pretty easy, pretty simple. I'm only going to tweet about startup things. No rainbows, no cute kittens. Tonight, we have Dan Engel, who is a serial entrepreneur. His bio is already exhausting for me to even think about having to read it, but I will do my best. I will start from the end and go to the beginning. From 2005 to 2015, Dan had co-founded and he was the CEO of FastSpring, which was a next-generation commerce, payment, merchandising, and fulfillment platform for software products. It was one of the fastest growing companies in the LA area, and it was named the 13th fastest growing company in North America. Currently has over 2,200 clients worldwide, including some very large software companies, Adobe, Toshiba, Random House, American Heart Association, et cetera. And we'll talk about the exit that Dan ended up pulling off there. It was quite impressive. So before that, he sold a company to a small company that you might not have heard of. I think it's pronounced Goggle. I'm not sure. Maybe it's Google. He sold a company to Google before they went public. The company was called Picasa. He was the marketing manager at that time and worked on building, he was the marketing manager once Google acquired them, and he worked on building up another small product called AdSense and another one called AdWords. Never heard of them. I don't know what Google does. Picasa today is an unbelievable property. It's the largest online photo destination with over 7 billion photos, which is bigger than Flickr. And they get over 50 million unique monthly visitors. So that's quite a good acquisition. A lot of times you'll hear about a company buying something and then it just dies and they never use it, they never use the technology, and it just it's a bad deal, it's a bad purchase. Clearly, Picasa was not a bad deal for this small company called Google. Before that, in 2005, Dan co-founded CPC Search, which was an online and paid search consultancy service company that worked with a number of companies, including Microsoft. Before that, he was a co-founder of, kind of concurrent with that, I should say, because Dan's the kind of guy that's always got several things going at once. He also co-founded a company called Morpheus Software, which was one of these cool, you probably saw it when you were growing up. It was one of those cool tools that would change your face, like you could put your face in there and then run the Morpheus software and it would morph it and do fun things with it. One of the videos they created of a cat or a kitten got over 50 million YouTube views with the time. It was one of the leading YouTube videos back in the dark ages of the internet when 50 million views was a lot. Before that, he worked with me. He was lucky enough to work with me. at a company called Expert City. I was actually lucky to bring on somebody like Dan. We were at the point where we needed to understand the internet, and we did not have that DNA inside of our company. So I hired 2 former CEOs of internet startups, and Dan was one of them, and Dan just killed it. In 18 months, we were generating over $25 million in recurring revenue. Dan's efforts were very instrumental in us selling that company for about $236 million to Citrix, and we had a wonderful ride there together. And before that, Dan was at the ripe old age of 24. He was signed on as an entrepreneur in residence at Idea Lab, which was one of the premier incubators back in before the last boom cycle in the early 2000s. Great experience for him there. Got to get involved in a number of high-profile companies. He's currently unemployed. I'm feeling kind of bad for him. He's actually doing a lot of things. He's not formally employed by a company, but he's doing a lot of investing, a lot of angel investing, venture capital investing, and he's working with entrepreneurs as an advisor. Like everyone that I try to bring in here, he is a good guy. He's a wonderful family man. He has a growing family, and he's trying to actually bring that family back to Santa Barbara because he made the mistake of moving away a few years ago. Let's give Dan a warm welcome. Well, like I said, I'm exhausted, okay? That was and I cut that back. I think you sent me 12 pages of bio.
Right, of course. Yeah. Well, thanks for that.
I left the junior high stuff out and all that other stuff you wanted to talk about. So one of the things that I encourage students to do is get internships when they're in college and to get mentors. You did both. So I want to talk about, we'll get to those in time. You interned at Merrill Lynch when you were in college, and you worked with Jim Magnum, who became a mentor for you. Love to hear how that experience transpired. Students are always wondering, how do you get a mentor? That feels weird. And how did that internship help you in your varied career after that? Because you didn't go into the financial services market.
Right. I thought I was going to, and so I had maybe 5 internships by the time I had graduated college. And I just believe in getting an early start. It just gives you an edge on everybody else who's focusing on something else. And then when it comes time for the job market, which is where you spend most of your life, you hopefully keep that advantage and continue to stay ahead. So in the case of the internship I had, which I started when I was a freshman in college, and I had it for all 4 years while I was in school, I'd say, what I learned from it, some of my sort of, I guess, some of the values of business, I'd say I learned. Jim was just a great guy, and he had a certain way of doing business. I was kind of hokey old, it was in Louisiana. It was a different way of doing things than I was used to coming from New York. I learned a lot from that. And also, I'd say being able to learn how to treat customers a certain way. So in his case, he was like a stockbroker, which they don't have so much of these days anymore, but he had tons of clients. He used to say he was managing more money than all but 3 banks in the state of Louisiana. And he never lost clients because of how well he treated people. And I'd say I carried that all the way through to especially FastSpring, the last business whose primary advantage was in how it treated its people and how those people thus treated the clients of our company.
Well, you also had another, I don't know if it was an internship or your first job at Fidelity Investment. So again, that theme of financial services, I imagine you thought that was going to be your path. You got to, you ran into people like Peter Lynch, like icons of that era, Ned Johnson and others. What did that experience, let me rephrase it. How did that experience help you in your startups, and does that experience continue to help you as you're doing angel investing?
So I would say it helped me somewhat with my career. A lot of what I use these internships for, part of it was learning stuff and trying to learn things before other people were learning it, who were similar age. But another part of it was networking and just being very aggressive to use my internship time to meet all these, well-placed people, so that when the time came, the job in the future would be set for me, or I wanted to get elevated, well, I knew the people at the different ranks. Because when you're an intern, you have sort of I don't know what you call it, but you've got a special place at the company. Like, you're not really accountable for anything, you're not really responsible. I mean, you are, you get some tasks, but at the same time, it's like you can kind of wiggle your way around and spend your time, once you get your work done, spend your time with the people that you want to. And often they'll pay attention to you. When you show people, especially who have been super successful, they might be veterans in the industry, that you're particularly interested in them and what they do, they often make time for you. We don't expect that, but they do, because people are interested in people that are interested in them. And they want to share their wisdom, and they don't get those kind of questions every day.
Yeah, I tell that to young people all the time, because oftentimes when you are young, you're thinking, well, what do I have to offer to this relationship? Well, what you have to offer is a chance for that person to pass along their wisdom and their experiences. And older people, especially successful older people, welcome the chance to help a younger person at the beginning of their career. So, and so what if you hit the oddball that doesn't want to give you the time of day? Fine, you just move on from that. But if you don't step out and ask, make that first, whereas Peter or any of these other people that were very well known at that time, if you're not willing to make that initial entree, then you can guarantee you're not going to get anything out of that relationship.
Yeah, well, my dad always used to say the worst thing they say is no.
Right.
So why wouldn't you?
Right, exactly. Then you move on. So as I mentioned, Dan was at Idea Lab in the late 90s. And for anyone that was sort of in the market in that time like I was, that was like the pinnacle of the dot-com. Later, the dot-com craziness, but before that, the dot-com brilliance. Like, they just put money in things that just turned to gold. They had so many opportunities, it just seemed like they were going to be, unlimited wealth creators. Some of them actually did still succeed. Mm-hmm. Many of them didn't. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You were in your early 20s. What was it like to be there in the middle of all of that madness as a young person?
And by the way, Picasa came out of Idea Lab, which is based in Pasadena. I don't know if you mentioned. So for me, I thought it was a dream job. My job was at 24 to build and try to IPO internet companies, specifically in the wireless space. And what it was like was, I was getting to spend time with some people that were my heroes. The CEO and founder of Idea Lab was a guy named Bill Gross, who in the dot-com days was seen as Bill Gates was for many, many years of the internet space. So, and as an entrepreneur, I'll never forget some cover he was on of Inc. magazine, reading that, and a lot of other entrepreneurs did too. And he was just, people really worshipped him. And I had the opportunity to work with him and build companies, hopefully with him. Now, what happened in reality, unfortunately, is everything kind of crashed. So that didn't last very long. It wasn't the dream job. And I found actually talking to other people too that think, they've taken such and such dream job. A lot of times things don't work out like one thinks. And that's what happened there. But in terms of the experience, it was just awesome to be in the thick of it. A lot of the things I've done in the past, I've been fortunate to be in the thick of. You were mentioning Fidelity. So when I was there in 96 or 90, something like that, the CEO, Ned Johnson, he was on the cover of Time magazine. Mm-hmm. You mentioned, because you were following him at that time. Yep. Fidelity was all over the place. It's different now.
You were like 12?
Yeah, 13. Actually, no. I was between my junior and senior years. And the reason I got that job, so, we talk about getting an early start, giving you an advantage. So there was one spot for an intern at Fidelity Management and Research Company. It was the division of Fidelity that was the most sought after. They were managing $600 billion, something like that. And it was the absolute pinnacle. And their symbol actually is the pinnacle. And every year in the past, there was one intern, and it was always somebody from Harvard. And I certainly didn't go to Harvard. I wouldn't be able to get into Harvard.
Never heard of it.
Right. So the way I got that, what I did is I got them to open a second slot. And the way I did that in that particular internship is Jim Mangum. It turned out, because I had those 4 years with him, his son happened to run one of the big funds and was best buddies with the person who's now the CEO of Fidelity, Abby Johnson. So again, it was networking through an internship, trying to get ahead, that really got me ahead. And the reason I did those kind of internships is because I thought I wanted to be some big shot in finance. And then during the dot-com time, I decided to change my course.
Become a big shot in tech.
I suppose. It was a really rare time when a 21-year-old was actually encouraged to start a company of significant size and could raise capital. things have changed since, and things were never the same before. And it's really a neat time. In fact, if you were 40 years old, like I'm about to be soon, they were not really interested in you, unfortunately. And in retrospect, for not good reasons, but at that time, it was a really unique window in time to be a really young entrepreneur and accomplish a lot. And so I went out and started a .com, and well, actually it was 97, and I graduated college 98. So I decided, the hell with it, we'll just go for it and shoot for the stars and see what happens.
Yeah, I remember people kept saying things have changed, and I kept thinking, no, they haven't.
Yeah.
Like, you still need to make payroll and sell stuff and all that.
Yeah, when you hear that, that's usually a warning.
Yeah,
sign.
that's the time to sell.
Yeah.
So one of the things you focused on at Idea Lab was, I kind of laughed when I read this, mobile internet. So what was mobile internet back in the late 90s? I'm sure we felt at the time that it was like really groundbreaking, and after this I'll take the first student question, so if you're ready.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole generation of these wireless internet, mobile internet companies, and the reason you guys probably haven't heard about it so much is because the whole thing went to heck. WAP was part of it, yeah. And if you ask, a tech historian what happened, so there was a whole generation of companies specific for mobile internet that disappeared, and I was part of a few of them. It wasn't very pleasant. But I think part of what happened is we were all sold a bill of goods. So the carriers made a big mistake that, Nextel, Sprint, whoever, they were showing us this amazing World Wide Web on phones in commercials. And so people thought there was all these amazing capabilities on mobile. And so everyone was investing and jumping in, and this was all going to happen tomorrow. 3G was coming from Japan. Reality was very different. And there really wasn't much of a value proposition, and browsing the web on these devices really sucked.
Excruciating.
Yes, yeah. So, I don't know if that's the whole story, but that's my sense of a big part of why it all failed. And I was part of some companies that we tried to build services for large enterprises moving to mobile back then, and eventually they didn't need to move into mobile.
Yep.
So.
Well, it's a technology adoption curve, right? Like there's that, the depths of despair and the overhype at the beginning. And you were definitely in that overhype period. A lot of people were. I remember a guy picked me up at the airport right around that time period, and he was so excited that he had a phone that would get to the internet, right? He was driving me into San Francisco. It literally took the entire drive from the airport to get to San Francisco to pull up one web page. Like, dude, that thing you have in your hand is a brick. It's not worth much.
Yeah.
But he was still proud of it. We'll take the first student's question.
Hi. In 2005, the issue of levying sales taxes on goods purchased online was brought up when California found it necessary to tax customers who order online but live in the same state as the physical stores. As states press to change the tax laws for these online companies, how did this affect your business's growth in its first few years of helping other companies sell nationwide and worldwide?
Well, that's a good question. So FastSpring, John mentioned a little bit about what it does. It handles online payments for software vendors around the world. Now it's about, 3,000 clients. The majority of them are outside the U.S. And it's software vendors from Adobe on down to just somebody in their dorm room. One of the capabilities is handling global taxation for software vendors, so they don't have to deal with when they sell software in Europe and they have to deal with value-added tax, or they sell it in California. We would deal with that. We were what's called the merchant of record, and so all the revenue of theirs was our revenue. We had that responsibility. So on the one hand, they were outsourcing that to us, and that gave more reason for them to outsource to us because they didn't want to deal with state-by-state regulations or international regulations. And then on the other hand, we were able to avoid having to deal with that to some extent because we're selling digital products, downloadable software, downloadable games, software as a service. We weren't dealing much with physical goods, so we weren't subjected so much to California tax issues related to internet sales.
It's definitely a big issue. A lot of folks just aren't reporting it accurately. Not the big companies. The big companies can afford to pay people, but a lot of these folks that are making money as internet vendors, but they're not big companies, it's really tough to track all of those different places where you have nexus. So I think it's a problem that still remains to be solved.
Right. And the bigger the problem, the better for FastSpring, because companies want to outsource that problem and not be responsible for it.
Yep. As is a company that I invested in, TaxJar, shameless plug. Yeah, they're trying to tackle that problem, but it's definitely a problem that a lot of people have. So in 2003 we met, or maybe it was 2002, something like that.
2002, yeah, probably.
So we had a business model at a company called Expert City that was completely broken. We pivoted to selling what is now called software as a service. Back then it was called ASP software. Michael Gagneri is here. He killed it on radio. This guy created the click on the radio microphone, all those radio ads, you have him to blame for that. So Michael was killing it on radio, generating tens of millions of dollars for us, and then later on TV, generating even more money. And then we had Dan over here on the online side. So we had a great team in the early days. We certainly did well. And a lot of success in life is really putting the right people around you. Dan was really important because, as I mentioned in the introduction, we didn't really understand the internet. I mean, we knew it as users of the internet and that sort of thing, but we didn't understand marketing on the internet. And the reality was nobody did. It was brand new. Like, no one had really figured out what Michael was doing with radio, how to get people to go from their car into their office, turn on the computer, go to a website and buy a piece of software. No one had ever done that before, and we cracked the code on that. And Dan helped crack the code on just a variety of other things that aren't even around anymore, but like pop-ups and these ads, and we were everywhere. I was getting my friends were giving me death threats. Like, dude, if I see another go to my PC ad, I'm killing you. Because we were everywhere. We had a business model that was working, and that's why we were able to attract talent like Michael and like you, because the world was crashing. So we were one of the top 5 internet advertisers for almost 2 years. Yeah. Spending more money on Yahoo than Microsoft, Oracle, all these other guys. Oh, yeah. So talk to me about, so I have my own memories of that time. I'd love to hear your memories, and then what did you take away from that into Picasa, FastSpring, some of these other companies?
Well, that was a great opportunity that you gave me because I was able to try to market this product using a somewhat unlimited budget. And what I mean by that is anytime we could test an ad channel that worked, the sky was the limit. We could really fund it. And so we spent some time in the trenches testing hundreds and hundreds of different channels. And so we learned what worked and what didn't, how to make things work that didn't originally work, like radio. When we first tried it didn't work, but eventually we got it to work, and you guys may have heard ads on radio. Same thing with television. That was challenging at first. So having that sort of runway to market the heck out of this new thing, which was a really compelling value proposition, and having the financing behind it to be able to do the testing appropriate to get millions of people potentially to millions of dollars of revenue to be recurring customers for the service. So, in terms of my experience with you, I would say you were a great mentor to me in the area of...
I'm not looking for you to compliment
I know, but I've said this to other people in the past, even when you're not here, which is I learned a lot about negotiating.
Well, tell them why. You would come into my office. How did that go down?
So I would come into your office and I would say, here's the terms that were being presented, and you would tell me to turn around and present something very different. And in the end,
I'd say, wait a minute, Michael's getting me. He's getting me on CNN. He's getting me on Fox, and he's bringing in a ton of customers. Come on, man.
That's true. You did do that in the begining. But I was competing against myself, so I wasn't too worried about that. Anyway, the Expert City experience, it was awesome to be able to be part of being such a large advertiser with a recurring service that became, what's now hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and very well-known
Third largest SaaS business, supposedly, after Salesforce and Oracle.
Yeah, and also, and you'll find this theme as we talk about some of the things I've done. And John mentioned he had a model that didn't work initially and then pivoted. There's a lot of failure behind a lot of these successes. And I remember when John and I worked on the first deals together, when I was involved as well, so post some of the failure they had, we failed as well. And we were like, we put together all these deals and they looked great, but it turns out they're not actually generating any revenue. And of course, we didn't just stop there. We kept going and we were persistent, and we thought, well, if we keep trying. And another lesson we learned out of that is, despite having this great product, despite having a wonderful lifetime value of each customer, so we could afford to do all sorts of advertising and business development deals, most marketing channels failed. So you'll notice this theme of failure and all this success, and I think it's an important takeaway. John and I had to have that tolerance to deal with a good amount of failure. And we learned over time that, marketing just isn't logical. Things that should work often don't. And stuff that you try that doesn't seem to make sense, like radio and TV for go to my PC, It actually worked. So what did we end up doing? We just tested things. We stopped our hypotheses. We stopped trying to think, well, if it was us, in the shoes of the, would that work for us? No, it was, let's just test things. And we had that attitude, and I think we carry that forward today.
I think it was very, and of course I sort of have glowing recollections, but I think when I try to cut through the reminiscing, I think we had a very entrepreneurial way of looking at business. We were willing to take risks. We were willing to try things. And I think back on the team, Big Kiblinger, who went off and had a huge success of his own, Elise Authors. So we had just a great team, and it's that rare moment that I hope all of you guys experience at multiple points in your career, where everything is working. Like the team's great, not every deal works, but you're in an environment where you can fail fast and figure it out and keep going, and that doesn't happen in every job. It doesn't happen in every company. So when you find it, run with it, stick with it.
And I would say it certainly made a difference having the runway we did.
Yeah.
Why did we have such a runway? Because with the original concept, we were able to raise enough money, $20-something million.
$32 million.
Okay, $32 million. That, good thing John's here. That we were able to just kind of keep going with, the first product didn't work, what are we going to do? Well, it turned out we had the time, we had the runway because we raised more money than we needed. And a lot of companies in that time didn't. Or they did, but they spent so much darn money so quickly that they lost the opportunity. And what you'll find in business, as my entrepreneurship professor used to say at Tulane, what's the number one reason businesses go out of business? They run out of money. So that's really the game, is figuring out how to keep that runway going.
But they don't run out of money. What do they run out of? They run out of people that'll give them money, and that's different. That's what I tell my students anyway.
There you go.
All right, we'll take the next student's question.
All right, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the process for you figuring out or finding direction as you transition after being in the late 90s, like the dot-com bubble, as things were changing there.
Well, let's see. Well, that's when I came out here. I had had enough of the dot-com craziness. I was in Cambridge, Mass. I had my own startup, and we spent 2 years on it, which at that age felt like it was 10 years. Now it's like 2 years, what's that? It ultimately failed. And the whole dot-com thing was coming crashing from under me. And I was at Idealab as an entrepreneur in residence, and then that went not out of business, but they laid us all off. It was just layoff left and right. And the tech industry, and this will happen again, was not in a recession, it was in a depression. Just like finance in 2008 was not in a recession like everybody else, they were in a depression. And in that time, nothing happens. People stop spending, companies stop spending, they stop hiring, and you're sort of left there. If you're in the industry, you weren't potentially like an executive that stayed on when you laid off all your people. So I came out here to get a break from Cambridge and the craziness there. And out here in Santa Barbara, there was still a lot going on, but not to the same extent, and you could relax at least a little bit. So how I transitioned, it actually took me a long time to transition. I had some really great experience. I had been CEO of a .com. I had been an entrepreneur in residence at Idealab, but because of the degree of the depression in technology, I was unemployed looking for a job for 5 months. And I mean like looking every day. So it was a tough transition. Obviously things worked out, and they will for other people in similar situations, but if one's persistent. I ended up in a tiny little software startup that made a little photo software organizing product that we ended up selling it to Broderbund, which is a big software company in the 80s, and then switching over to working with John, and things just sort of took off from there once we tried some things out.
And some of it was proximity. You were in the same building that I was in, right? And somebody said, hey, there's this really wily entrepreneurial guy down at the end of the hall there, you should go talk to him. So, it's funny because Dan was saying earlier, the fact that he was 20, 21 helped him get funding. After the crash, I wouldn't say nobody wanted to touch those guys, but that suddenly was not cool. Like, oh, you are a .com CEO, and your head's going to be filled of all these misconceptions about what business is about, and you're going to be entitled and all these other things. And so I think another reason why Dan was successful was he was self-aware enough to not fall into that trap. Like he went from being, CEO of this company with funding and high profile, and then he had to come in and work for me. Like he had to be part of a team again. And we actually hired another guy, not a bad guy, good guy actually, who didn't quite work out as well as Dan. And I think it might have been, some of that might have been that Dan was more willing to just be a team player and kind of come in. They both had been CEOs of their own startups and during the height of the .com. And sometimes it's hard to go from being the CEO to being, moderate level person. You weren't senior.
No, it was really difficult mentally more than anything, and it absolutely is not what I wanted to do.
But as I remember it, I don't remember that as being a rub with you, even though it might have been internally.
No. Yeah. Well, at that point, I think it's what I needed to do. But what I learned going through that is, you go to one extreme and you think the other is completely foreign and not going to be comfortable. And what I learned is actually both sides are really wonderful in all sorts of different ways. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. And certainly after my first company, which was like Amazon.com for magazine subscriptions was basically the concept. After that failed, and I came to terms with the fact that I needed to get a job. I was really scared of that. The whole paycheck thing, working for somebody, was absolutely opposite, I thought, of what I wanted. But I had no choice. And it turned out in retrospect that there's so many positive advantages to that situation that it almost makes it hard to go back and want to do a startup again. So both sides are good in their own ways, and one often leads to the next.
Yep. Yeah. And I think my recollection is I remember thinking these two guys I'm hiring are former CEOs. I wanted to give you guys a lot of latitude. But if you remember, I did with Michael and Elise and everyone else and Ben, everyone, if they were performing, had as much latitude as they wanted.
Which is how I did things in FastSpring as well.
Yeah.
If you hire smart people and they know what they're doing, once they show you that they know how to do what they're doing, you leave them alone, let them run. And I think that was probably through you, and then I carried that forward with my last business.
I honestly believe I'm a lousy manager, but I did a pretty good job of hiring people. But I would never say I was a good manager. But if you hire the right people, you don't have to be a great manager.
That's right.
They don't need to be managed.
So that makes you a good manager.
I'm a good hirer, recruiter person, I think. Not that great.
All right.
I learned a lot of that from Andreas, by the way. So we sold the company to Citrix. I didn't stay all that long, but this guy beat me out the door. Like, you left like the day after. Like, what happened? And I want to hear about why you left, but also Morpheus. So one thing you'll find with entrepreneurs is we often have several things going in our lives. I think back as a kid, I always had 3 or 4 little ventures going. Morpheus was kind of like a side project.
Right.
And then, so maybe talk a little bit about why'd you leave the side project, and then how did that lead to going back to, well, let's stop there, and then we'll talk about Idea Labs.
So why I left is because John and I had this crazy hockey stick of growth. $40 million in revenue from not nothing, but a pretty small base in 18 months. And it was getting to a point, there was this new product, GoToMeeting. The growth had kind of flattened out. We tested so many channels. And I need to be excited. And it was very exciting, and it was almost like a drug. It was that exciting, of constant, making new deals. And that got kind of flat growth and just not nearly as interesting. GoToMeeting for a while, GoToMeeting was really hard to market, and I sort of sensed that. But combined with that, the guys from Idea Lab came back to me and they said, "We've been seeing what you've been doing all over, the internet, TV, whatnot, with GoToMyPC, and can you do that for us?"
Right.
And with Picasa, because it was a similar situation. Great product, great PR, didn't know how to market it, weren't getting the revenue, losing money. So I went and did that. And I leveraged a lot of what John and I did for this other product, and we were able to grow revenue like 7x in 6 months, and then we sold it to Google 9 months after I started doing that. Your other questions?
So Morpheus as a side project.
So Morpheus, I did partly out of need because I got to a point where I wanted to start my own thing again. And Morpheus, if I could make revenue from that, was a way to sort of have a springboard to leave the working world again, have some income that I'd feel comfortable doing my own startup where I had those risks.
Were you working on that when you were still at Expert City?
I started working on that in 2001.
So I should have fired you.
No, because moonlighting is not illegal.
I knew about it. I'm kidding.
Perhaps for other reasons you should have fired me. But anyway, and Morpheus became really popular. So the idea behind that, so basically what I did is I said, well, I've been involved in other companies where we didn't have revenue, and turns out demand didn't occur. So what I did is I found something that already had demand. Morpheus was this product for image morphing, manipulation, and distortions. You could like grow body parts. You could put heads on different animals' bodies. You could morph images and transform one person or one thing into another. And it was getting tens of thousands of downloads every week. And I noticed that the company behind it wasn't actually a company. It was a person. And he was giving it away for free. So I just sent him an email and I said, hey, you want to maybe partner? I notice you're getting tons of downloads. How many people you think might buy this? He said 0. Well, it turned out plenty of people bought it. And this thing we started out that was free, we ended up, and even though it's just for goofing off with pictures, we ended up having an average order size of $65 per order. So we took it a real far way. And like you mentioned earlier, it led to these videos on YouTube that got nominated for the YouTube Awards and got us traction there. And we put together a social network, which was mildly successful, and all sorts of other things that it took me. And then the back-end system that we built, I sort of custom built with the developer who was behind Morpheus, became all the knowledge that I had for FastSpring, which is a back-end system for other software vendors like Morpheus. Yep. So I find a lot of these initiatives one takes on one's own lead to other things that one can do later, even if they don't work out or don't scale. And Morpheus did well, but it didn't scale the way I had wanted. And you mentioned earlier that I tend to do a few things at once. Often that's to diversify risk. So I had Morpheus going, I had CPC Search, and I had FastSpring. Well, good thing I ended up doing the third one, FastSpring, because the other two did well, and they were successful, but they didn't scale. They didn't get into the millions that I was seeking. Right. But FastSpring did, and not at the beginning, but over time.
Yep. Next question.
So you touched on this a little earlier, but as a serial entrepreneur, how are you able to determine when to leave a particular company in search of a new product or market? And furthermore, how has your time as an entrepreneur in residence at Idealab influenced your approach to starting or joining a new venture?
Being an EIR at Idealab, that was so short-lived. I don't feel like it had that much impact. And I had been an entrepreneur in residence at another incubator before that, and that thing crashed too. This was a crazy time in technology. So I don't think it had a ton of influence. I talked a little bit earlier. But in terms of being a serial entrepreneur and figuring out when to say when with a venture, I guess for me, fortunately, I haven't had to do that too many times because a lot of what I've been doing, at least the last 10 plus years, have been really successful. But most of what I did before those, now it's probably 12 years, was actually pretty unsuccessful. And I did a bad job in the first venture coming out of college. It was very hard to get myself to say when and move on. Partly psychological because it was my baby from college, and partly because financial and other reasons too. And I still hoped it worked. But I'd say one thing that turned me off to some of the ventures I was working on when FastSpring took off was they weren't scaling. And I think that's one thing. It's like, look, you have this vision. You want to build a company that's doing $1 million in revenue, 10 million, 100 million, whatever you're aiming for. And when you see that's not happening, you keep pounding the pavement and doing what you plan to do and trying all the different channels of distribution, whatnot, and you're not getting there. I think that's time to look in the mirror and think about it a little bit. So that's one of the ways that I dealt with it.
It's always hard. It's always hard to know when to quit because you obviously don't want to quit too soon. But sometimes you can hang on. I'd rather err on the side of hanging on a little too long. So I remember a story you told me in the early days of Google. I'd love to hear, I won't name names, but this is how I remember the story. They bought the company. Some of the very, very high profile people at Google sat down and said, great, what does your company do and why do we buy you? Is that how, am I remembering it right? And what were the early days of Google like? Yeah, so this is somewhat early, 2004, before the IPO, as John mentioned. And Google was a bit of a zoo. They didn't have their act together. And by the way, they didn't need to. They were doing plenty fine being a crazy place. Yep. They hadn't done many acquisitions, so they had very little in infrastructure for integrating or doing acquisitions. They were just, I think, starting out their corporate development department, which dealt with acquisitions. Constant meetings, and I remember that marketing people there. So, in a lot of technology companies, they're either engineering companies or they're marketing companies. It's usually one or the other.
And Google was absolutely an engineering company. And I'm not talking about what it is today because I'm not there, I don't know. But at the time, so they didn't have much respect for the marketing side of the house. And that meant the marketing side of Picasa coming in, my team. And that meant, I was in charge of all their customer acquisition. And I didn't get much love. I remember us marketing people would kind of walk around and give each other looks like, nobody cares about what we're doing. This place is really odd. And, obviously, God bless them. It worked out really well for Google. And when you're getting all your users coming for free, things work out usually pretty well. And that continues to work. And when the one product that you have is 90+% of your revenue continues to be an amazing product endlessly, like it has been all these years, you can do things in a way that isn't always the most sensible from a marketing standpoint and get away with it. And they did. And good for them. It's worked well.
It's probably hard for folks in this audience and young people watching this online to realize that when Google came out, everyone thought search was done. Like, people thought search was solved. We weren't sitting around going, God, search kind of sucks. I wish somebody would fix it. There was tons of search engines, and they all worked pretty well. It's just a good example of somebody coming out with a better mousetrap. It hardly ever works. Like, usually a better mousetrap, people don't care. But this was one time when a better mousetrap was that much better, and there was other things that happened in the market. They were willing to private label and things like that, where the engineers won. And usually, though, you need balance. You need the marketing expertise, the sales expertise, and the engineering expertise to pull it off. They're a rare example of doing it with maybe one leg in the stool. So 2005, you start FastSpring. I remember talking to you about it. I remember going to lunch, and we talked about that experience. One thing that always intrigued me was, as you grew the company, it was an incredibly decentralized company.
Right.
Even at the end, right? You still have people all over. So talk a little bit about the impetus for that, how it worked, and how decentralized it really was.
Yeah, FastSpring, we did it in a unique way. FastSpring these days is over $100 million business, and it wasn't much less than that when we had about 12 people. And by the time we sold the business, and we did it all, by the way, with $30,000. No venture capital, that's it, that's all we used. And in terms of people, we had an approach that had to do with finding the best people and the best fits for the positions we had, and not the best people who happened to be in the same zip code.
Yep.
And so when we got it at the acquisition point, it was about 22 people. Now it's going to be 45 soon, I think. But out of those 22, I think we had 3 people in Santa Barbara. And everybody else was working generally from home. Some people were in other countries. And even the co-founders. So the co-founder, we had 4 co-founders, and they were all very essential. I was just one of them. I was the CEO, but we all had our different areas of the business that we were responsible for. One handled all the customer service area. One handled the development of the product. One handled ultimately sales, though I did that for the first few years. And then me doing sales and then doing other things like marketing and hiring, things like that. We went through, I think, a period of 3 years during the 8-year life cycle of FastSpring where those co-founders, we didn't even see each other. We didn't even get together once. And we would communicate through email and sometimes phone. Every once in a while, there's something really important, just get on the call. Now, you can't do that in every situation, but if you have the right kind of people who just, they're not looking for a fight, they're easygoing, laid back, like, let's just make a decision. And in this case, all 4 of us had been CEOs before. So we kind of knew what we were doing, and we had the division of labor pretty strong. So it's like I said earlier, he had this section, I had that section. So and I didn't need to know about what they were doing in their areas. They know what they're doing.
Yep.
So, and then they would have people under them. So that's how we did it, and it worked really well. And one of the...
What does the company look like now? Has it become more centralized?
Well, yeah. So the folks who bought the company have decided that because they want to make the company sell for a lot more later and be a more sustainable and substantial company, they want to have most of the people be in the same place, which is they've decided Santa Barbara, which makes a lot of sense because when we went through the process of trying to raise money at one point, take some money off the table and sell the company, we did run into potential partners, buyers, whatever, that would say, oh, well, I really don't like that the company is spread out over the place. But ultimately, it didn't matter, but there certainly were some that were turned off. And I think the larger that you get, the harder that argument gets because then you've got more money, bigger firms, they want stability, they want to be able to control things from a single place. But it was actually turned out to be a huge advantage for us. We gave our people a very large amount of flexibility and a lot of respect for their time. Like I said earlier, those that showed that they were able to get their job done, we left them alone. And they could work on their own terms. They want to work, at midnight. They want to work on the weekend. They want to work from Spain because they've been dying their whole life to spend a month there. As long as they're getting their work done.
Right.
And so part of what came out of that was our phenomenally advantageous customer service, because our competitors had customer service where you get like a auto response, someone will get back to you in 24 hours. Whereas FastSpring, we were responding, 11 o'clock on Saturday night, Christmas Day, all throughout the day. And I didn't have to ask anybody to work those hours. It's just they cared, and they appreciated how they were treated. And we also hired the kind of people that, they'd sleep with their laptop in bed with them. So to them, it was like, well, I'm checking my email anyway, so. And customer service was our largest advantage, and still is.
So
partly because of the culture and how we treated people.
Takeaway is hire people that sleep with a computer.
Yes.
Awesome. Next question.
So John mentioned that you're gainfully unemployed now, and one of your focuses is on angel investing and evaluating companies for investment. So, when you come to a company or founder, what are the top 3 criteria that you look for, and how are those criteria influenced by your personal history?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is I ask John about it.
And I always say, don't do it.
Yeah, he says I'm busy. Well, I think traction is probably number 1, because if you have enough traction, you have to worry less about number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Not always, but to some extent. Having seasoned veterans behind a venture, there's so many ventures I've been involved with, John's been involved with, where they've got a great idea, maybe they even have traction that's significant, but because these guys didn't come out of the industry, because they're not seasoned, they end up losing, and they lose because they just didn't know the pitfalls. They didn't know what not to do. And an investment that could have been a winner with a seasoned executive who would have known how to navigate things and deal with people in the industry might have otherwise been successful. And I think, having an idea where someone sitting across the table from you can understand pretty quickly the value proposition, that it's just not far-fetched. Like, I get why that makes sense and why people need that. In fact, I've been working on a new potential venture myself in the mobile SaaS space, and I sat down with John the other day, and I said specifically, John, don't act like my friend, act like a VC who's tough on me, and I want to know your thoughts on this. And his response, part of it anyway, was, I see a need. I see a clear need. He also said, some of his concerns, but, I want something where there's a clear need and it's not a big discussion to understand the value proposition or to really believe that there's validation enough in the marketplace. So those are 3.
So when you sit down with entrepreneurs as a VC or as a angel investor, do you see, or an advisor even, are you seeing consistent mistakes that young people make? Like, are there things that you're like, oh, there it is again? And I'm just wondering if you're seeing the same mistakes over and over, it's probably informational for these folks.
Yeah, I think one mistake is following the headlines.
Yeah.
So we all think we're supposed to be raising millions of dollars in venture capital and be on TechCrunch and this and that. And I think that's a wrong way to go about it in most people's cases, because what you're doing when you're looking at venture capital is you're really setting something up to fit the needs of the venture capitalists and their portfolios. So you're also creating a business that is like the clock starts ticking. We talked about earlier that the easiest way to fail is to run out of money. Well, you start getting this burn rate, you get this pressure, things aren't going the way you expect, which is usually how it all goes. And then what? What kind of situation are you in? How are you going to get out of it? How are you going to stay sustaining? Are you going to be taken advantage of by your investors? When you work with angel investors, you tend not to have that same amount of pressure, and you're not giving up generally as much control. It's an easier situation to facilitate when things get difficult. Not in every situation, there are exceptions. Or doing it through sort of bootstrapping, like I've done a few times, where it's not a lot of money, maybe it's your money, maybe it's some friends and family. But the other problem with venture capital that a lot of the entrepreneurs seem to not pay enough attention to is, yeah, it's great when you see this headline that such and such exciting company raised $30 million. Well, guess what? They're not going to be able to sell unless they get to a value of like $300 million,
Right.
which works for the venture capitalist who's got these numbers like, well, I just have to hit 1 in 10 or whatever it is. But what about the founder or the employees who would have been happy to sell for $50 million, $100 million, and would have been wealthy and everybody would have been happy, huge success? Well, they might not be able to do that anymore, not until their investors are happy. So, you know, who are you building the business for? And also, you want to be able to control things when they don't go well, so that if you have a vision, you can stay true to it and do what you ultimately plan to do. So.
Yeah, I agree with the chasing the headlines, kind of trying to fight,
Yeah.
fighting last year's war. And I think when, you know, there are companies where venture capital is a good fit, I think in those cases, it's really important to make sure that your definition of success as an entrepreneur matches the venture capitalist definition of success, right? Because if your 50 million is a great outcome for you and they're like, we're not going to let you sell this company for 50 million, that's something you want to know ahead of time.
Yeah.
Certainly don't want to figure that out when they tell you can't sell your business.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd say, you know, another thing I run into a lot is a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, they think their idea is the best thing in the world, but, you know, as soon as somebody else comes out with something similar, oh, you know, game over. And, you know, if you think about it, just looking at the past companies we've been involved with, so many of them were products and services that there were alternatives for years.
Microsoft gave our product away.
Right.
Or bundled it for free,
Right.
I should say.
Yeah.
And people would constantly say that to us, but what about Microsoft? And
Yeah.
what about them?
For free, or it came into Windows, or VNC, there was
remember
free
that
options.
piece of crap?
And, you know, look at Picasa. There were like 50 photo organizers, but Picasa did it differently. So if you can kind of make your mark and do the same kind of thing where the value proposition's there and the opportunity's there, but do it in a different way that really makes a lot of sense, you don't have to be turned off by the fact that there's competitors and the fact that this industry's been around forever. You just have to do it better for the customers, and you can still win just the same. In a lot of cases, you're better off that way than trying to, you know, revolutionize some new market, and, you know, the odds are much lower.
Yep, I've been down that road. Now, I love the competition. Remember in the old days with WebEx, and a good competitor makes you better. Like if you've ever played tennis, and I'm not a very good tennis player, but if you're a decent tennis player and you play with somebody who sucks, you're not a good tennis player anymore, right? You're running around the court going, what happened to my game? You're better when you're competing with somebody who's good. So embrace that, just, you know, make sure you beat them. We'll take the next question.
So I know in your bio you mentioned that at FastSpring you strove for a 100% recurring revenue model. I guess what steps did you take at the company to really kind of to solidify your revenue stream and really kind of create consistent and loyal customers? Yeah,
so it wasn't exactly 0%. Our churn, so about at the time, say 2,200 customers, was 0.2% a month or 0.6% a quarter, if I recall. And that was a pretty unheard of churn. And we also had some pretty unheard of statistics. I remember we did one of those net rating scores, and, you know, they talked to our customers to figure out how satisfied our customers were. One of the key questions I asked is, how likely are you to like refer somebody you like to this service provider? And I remember them telling us, and I don't have a lot of experience with this kind of data, I haven't dealt with that before, but they said, you know, some scoring system, the average software company was 35, and Apple was like in the 50s, and we were in the 70s. And I was pretty proud of that. And the reason we didn't lose customers is because we didn't give any room for competitors to have advantages over us that would be sustainable. So even though our industry started in 1994 for FastSpring, when Digital River came out and they eventually went public and they were a billion-dollar company we had to compete with, they left some big holes in the marketplace. And so our advantage was basically to have similar technology, but have it, or similar functionality, but be next generation technology. So none of this dinosaur, clunky, old, you know, inflexible technology. To have pricing that was not excessive like the competition, but reasonable and just made sense for the value proposition. And then more than anything, not have customer service that's awful or okay or good, but absolutely phenomenal. Knock your socks off kind of customer service. And we accomplished all those things with very little money and very few people just by having a different approach and a different culture. We used to get clients saying things like, working with FastSpring is the best customer service experience in my life in any industry. There was one guy that said, I felt like I just went to the spa. And we're just doing payment processing for software vendors. Pretty boring business. We put them on the website. So we were able, so on the price side, you wouldn't switch away. So we would get clients that would switch from every competitor that we had. And I'm talking about like 12 plus competitors, because this industry had been around for a while. But nobody would ever leave FastSpring, with very, very rare exception. And it's because, well, you're not going to get lower price. So we said, well, we don't want to put our price, like we can make more money, we might be leaving more money on the table. But we didn't want to have pricing where we had to spend half our time getting the clients and the other half trying to keep them and trying to win them back and things like that. And we also, because our overhead was so low, we didn't need to charge as much. And we also didn't have the pressure from like Wall Street, caring about our margins like Digital River did, being a publicly traded company. So price we made to a point as a strategy that it's like it really didn't make sense to switch away. I mean, you could do bare bones, like use PayPal and you'd lose all the functionality but save some money, but you weren't saving that much money. Or use your own merchant account, do your own processing. You'd only save a little bit, but you'd have to do all the work. And then customer service, once you got used to our customer service, you knew, I mean, we happened to be in an industry where customer service was particularly bad. And you knew what you were getting into if you had been in the software space for a while. And you were never going to get customer service as good as ours. You could, they might try, it might get, it might be good, it could be great, but never like the experience you were having with FastSpring, because you can't have it any better. We were just doing things to a point, and there's companies that, Zappos, for example. I was there recently getting a little tour, and they were telling me how they take some of their best customers and they'll send people to like clean their house. That's the kind of loyalty they want from their customers, or do other services for them, because they just go absolutely above and beyond. And guess what? Nobody can compete with that. You can't provide better service than that. And that was part of our strategy, and that's why nobody ever left, because of the combination of those three things. It was a pretty strong combo.
Awesome. So we'll take the last student question, and then I have a final question.
So you're an entrepreneur and resident at Idea Lab. It sounds like after having started an e-commerce company in college. So what motivated you to take your first steps as an entrepreneur in college instead of following the trend of going to working for a big corporation?
That's a good and relevant question. Well, I had three possibilities. So first of all, I absolutely didn't want to get a job. I had risen as an intern to what I felt like was the heights of finance, and I had seen that even those at the top who I had so much respect for still had limited control over their success. And part of why is because they're picking stocks, and you always think, oh, well, that guy knows it. These guys don't know what to do, but those guys, no. Everybody's more or less guessing. There are a few exceptions. So that was part of it, and also I didn't want to be in a role, in a job, in finance, for example, where I felt like it didn't use a lot of my skills. Like, I'm sure I would have been good at it, but I could tell, and I also got feedback from other people, my skill set covered a lot of different areas, which is great for an entrepreneur. You want to be good at a whole lot of things at once. You got to still be able to focus. But let's see. I thought about going into real estate development. I thought about actually opening a nightclub.
Ooh, don't do that.
Yeah.
Please.
And then I thought about doing one of these .coms. And I remember talking to my entrepreneur professor about it. He's like, Dan, nightclub? He's like, you realize someone's going to have to sweep the floor, you're going to have to deal with this and that. I was like, yeah, you're right. The real estate thing, it just didn't hold compared to the .com opportunity. And the .com thing, and this goes for starting a company out of school, it's like, you know what, if the damn thing fails, you learn so much that you can use for the rest of your career, and I've been doing that it's like, when you're that young, you don't have much to lose, and you give it a shot, and so what if you fail? Who knows what you'll build next? And these entrepreneurship ventures are really a numbers game. It's like, if you want to succeed, it's not about having the greatest idea ever and putting everything into that indefinitely. It's about trying different things, just like we did in marketing. So I did 3 at once at one point, like we said. I also started various ventures. Some worked, some didn't. And a lot of the really successful entrepreneurs, you only hear about their successes, but how many failures did they have, maybe at the same time or before that brought them that experience, or that they had to go through to get the odds in their favor to have a success?
Dan, this is a great way to kick off the spring series. Thank you so much for coming out. Appreciate it.